We're going to talk today about the self-service portal and the how we can customize it and some of the options available there. So we've been talking largely about the IGA capabilities around user lifecycle management, the access request capabilities, the workflows, um, the um, the access reviews, and all along we've been using the self-service portal, but we haven't really talked about how we can control the level of behavior that we have there and how we may want to customize it. So we've kind of deviated a little bit from the original outline in terms of the sequence of the sessions. But we'll still cover the original topics that were planned, just maybe in a little bit different order. But I think this kind of having, covering this topic at this point makes sense, right? So in terms of the session today, we're going to talk a little bit about what the self-service portal does. We'll talk about how we can control access within that portal. We'll then talk about a feature that we call organizational level delegation. It actually, we use it quite a bit, a lot more than we ever expected to when we implemented that feature in terms of being able to limit the visibility of users within the self-service portal. And then we'll talk about, some more ordinary things like self-service password reset. We'll talk about how we can do some branding, some self-registration capabilities, and we'll wrap up with kind of talking about how we can use the OpenIAM API to build additional capabilities, right? So that being said, let's talk about the portal, right? So we know we can use it to create access requests, to approve. We know we can use it to for the end user part to do the reviews of access certification. It actually goes a lot deeper than that. So some of the capabilities there we have, the SSO capability that we provide is also been integrated. So this is part of the Access Manager. We'll cover SSO and Federation in the next session, actually not in 2 sessions from now. But that Federation capability is kind of built into that portal. You also have some capabilities around self-service password reset. You can do self-registration. You can create profiles and manage your own profile from there. There's also some capabilities around like manager self-service and contractor management, right? So there's a bunch of stuff in there. Basically it's grown over time with the intent that we want to keep people out of the web console, right? Because there's all this administrative capability there, and we don't really want to expose that to really people who really don't need it, right? That's basically what the rationale is, right? So all the capabilities that we have there in the self-service portal, and this applies to the web console as well, is controlled through a person's entitlements, meaning, that I'm in a certain role or a certain group membership, and what can I do? So when it comes down to that, right? So if you remember from a couple of sessions ago, we talked about the access control model, and the access control model was made up of resources, groups, roles, and organizations, and that we can extend those, right? So we can create new types of objects. So within OpenIAM itself, we actually do extend those objects to serve just that purpose. So all the menus that you see when you log into OpenIAM, either in self-service or in the web console, they're basically a type of resource. So it's just another metadata type. It's called a menu, and menus are basically organized into trees. So you have like this, for example, the two top level menus that you'll see are one's called IDM, and the other one's called self-service. IDM represents all the menus in web console. The name is more of a legacy. It's been there for many, many years. Um, so um, and self-service is just for that, right? That being, and then within that you can have menu elements that you have, and then you can have child menus that, And once you define your menu object, you can grant, and you can entitle a group or a role to that menu. So in the screenshot, you'll see what the top level menu options look like for self-service, and you'll see things like My Info and My Applications. So you can basically, take various aspects of this and grant access to people, right? Now, and we're going to do like a practical thing, like we always do, and kind of dig into this a little bit more. Within each menu object, like for example, if you were to look at say My Info, there are two flags there. One is called is public, and the other one's called is visible. And the names always trip people up, and even for me, I need to go back and remember, what they really do. But what is public does is that it's a menu options visible to all authenticated users. So it's not really a public feature in the sense that you can access it without authenticating, but it's public in the sense that you don't need to be entitled to it, right? So it's like if you have a menu option that you want to expose to everyone, and you don't care what role they're in, you can mark it as public, right? Um, the the is visible thing is a way to hide and show menus. So there might be cases where you just don't want a menu to be visible. You don't really care what group or role they're in. You don't want anyone getting to it, and so you can, take the is visible attribute and mark it as false. Right? That said, let's jump over um, to our demo instance, and we'll take a look at this, in a more practical sense. Okay, so just going to log into the web console. So first things first, let's just go to the menus, right? So we go to access control, we go to menus, and then you'll see a whole bunch of them. And I'm going to explain this in a second, but let's go to self-service, right? So we have the self-service menu, and then you'll see, My Info, and if you expand out request approval, you'll see the menu options that we see there, right? And so if you look at these various options like this one, you see access profile. It's marked as public being false and then invisible being true, meaning that I have to be entitled to this menu option. It's not going to just show up for me, right? On the other hand, if I look at say My Info, is public is true, and is public and is visible is also true, which means My Info is available to everyone, right? So now, if you go back to this menu screen that we have here, you'll see that there's all sorts of like child objects, and some of these cases they're actually not even menus, right? So for example, let's say we take the user and I'm just going to randomly pick something. Let's pick the user info page, right? And so these are the various options which are there. I think these are actually making up a dropdown. I don't think that this is a menu per se, right? So you can use it in different ways. And similarly, like if you go back to, go back to menus, and this one is it's a group of buttons, right? So and again, the part of the reason why these things are being used this way, it's kind of like a grouping of objects, and you can use the access control model to be able to control how to grant access to it, right? So this way you can turn things on and off like inside of a page as opposed to just a menu bar. So now if I go into, let's say for example, I'll pick a role, and let's say I have a help desk role here, and if we open that up, you'll see on the side menu bar that there's an option called menus. And here we can see, we can pick, for example, self-service, and we can see what this menu can do. So what we're seeing is three menu options, which are marked as public. So this person will be able to see, a person logs in a help desk role, they'll see this menu tree, but only these three options, right? So this is the public part. Um, if you check off something, it's going to mean it's explicitly entitled, meaning that, let's say, for example, if I did that, right? So that means I'm explicitly entitling the My Approvals menu option to the help desk role. If it was inherited from another role, and this was already granted, this would have been it would have been blue, meaning that it's an implicit entitlement, and it's implicit because it was inherited from another role that has it. Um, all that being said, the menuing interface is not easy to use. And we will be refactoring it later on this year as we are overhauling the UI. So if you're having a hard time with it, we understand, right? But the point of this is to make this usable, at least during that period, right? But so in this way, you should be able to control what you can and can't do, and define how things work. Also, if you are making changes and you are looking at your self-service in another window and trying to see how the changes are being reflected, just keep in mind that there is a cache and it takes about 5 minutes by default. That's a frequency when the cache is going to refresh. So you will see it in anywhere within that sub 5 minute window. You'll see those changes refresh. Yeah. All right. I think that's pretty much the gist of what you need to know about menus. I don't think you need to go deeper than that. Okay, so this topic, we call it organizational level delegation. But so here's the pain point. There are organizations, and it could be both in a workforce identity and in a customer identity use case, where you have either an outside organization or a group of people within your organization um, that they need access to the portal, and they want to be able to manage a subset of users. So it's just the people who are basically in their organization, right? So consider maybe you're working with another vendor. They have a large number of people that they are placing, or working within your company, and you don't want to deal with managing, every last one of their people, right? So what you can do is you can say, you can tell your partner, well, okay, I'm going to assign one or two people who are in this. Let's call it it's a client admin role, right? And that client admin role is bound by this organization delegation, and they can see only the people who work within their world, right? So they go to the self-service, manage user function, and they can see just their people. They won't be able to see, the rest of the employees or the people who are there. Um, and in this way, you can kind of offload some of that administrative stuff. Now, then the question becomes, well, how much capability do we want to give them? So what we did was we also have some controls around the catalog where we can say, well, you can only manage a certain set of permissions, that you can't really see the whole catalog. So it's using the access control model to be able to limit how much, which categories of applications and features you can see, and not expose, everything to them, right? And this way they can become responsible for managing their organization. Another use case is that you may have partners. So sometimes in state and federal governments, you may have other organizations, agencies who you work with, and you want to let those people again manage their own people in terms of onboarding them, offboarding them. And this again gives us a way to kind of limit what we can do, right? And the way to turn this on is really simple. It's literally a checkbox that says limit search only in organization scope. This is in the system configuration, tab, and I'll show you that in a second when we go back into that area. Now, this capability is going to grow quite a bit in the 4.2.2 release coming out in a few weeks, where not only is it limited to the organization, um, but it will apply on the entire access control model. So you can say, not just in the catalog, but even in other areas where that a person who is bound by this organization, filter can only see certain groups and roles and be able to assign them. If there are child organizations within them, they can see only that, right? So the it's it's almost like a virtual tenant inside of your main sandbox, right? So it's not quite all the way to being a multi-tenant kind of a filter, but it's sort of taking a significant step in that direction, just in using this capability. So instead of having like completely a physical separation, you can have like this virtual separation there. Next thing is this one is kind of one of those. It's like a mundane topic. It's been there since the first day that we probably, the first release that we ever put out. Obviously, it's grown since that time. But this is around, self-service password reset. So there's a password policy that you can define that will control, um, password composition, the frequency that you need to change it, um, the parameters around how you can use forgot password. So all of those things, and the reason we're bringing this up is because it's part of the self-service portal. Some customers who are using OpenIAM as the IDP, they use this. The ones who have a different IDP, they use these tools as part of the IDP that they're using, right? So it's there if you need it. If you don't need it, that's fine too. But there's a number of capabilities there. So besides this whole, the password definition part, you can upload a password dictionary in there where you can check that that certain words are not being used. Right? So you can have a dictionary for that, or a certain frequently used words are not being used as part of passwords. Just kind of make the policy a little bit stricter. The password policy that we create, it affects a number of things. It affects so first of all, you're not limited to one password policy. That's one part. You can have more than one policy, and there is somewhere on this compressed screenshot, there is a priority parameter. So if you have two conflicting policies that are being triggered, it will be internally the system will use the priority parameter to determine which policy to use. But regardless of that, once the policy has been selected, it can be used for a number of things. It can be used to automatically generate passwords. Say, for example, we're creating a new user. You're putting them into AD. It needs to have a certain composition, so that password policy can be used to kind of randomize that temporary password and still comply, with the AD policy that you have in place. Obviously, it's used for self-service password reset. It's also used for change password. Um, there's a help desk password reset, feature. So these parameters are kicking in over there as well. And then there's a manager-driven, self-service password reset, right? So with that said, let's jump over. I'll show you a couple of things in terms of where we define these things. Actually, one last thing. There in that system configuration area, there is a tab called password, and it controls which parameters that we expose on that login page, meaning do we want to turn on forgot username? Do we want to um, so there's a question that says, is there support for validating password changes um, against the have I been pawned data set and the banned password list? So in the 422 release, there is the ability to make a call to the have I been pawned API to be able to validate that. Um, there isn't a check to go through all the people's passwords on a periodic basis, but I think I know where this is coming from, and if that would be helpful, we can certainly talk about it on one of our calls, and it's not hard to implement. So we can certainly, add that onto the short-term roadmap if needed. Right? Okay. Um, so yeah, on this screen, besides the options that we enable, there are also parameters in terms of which methods we use to kind of reset passwords. And all of those options can be defined here as well. Okay, so first thing, just in terms of, kind of a demo aspect, right? Um, okay, we were talking about the organizational level delegation. So again, administration, system configuration, and one second, let me just get my PDF file. So on the password part, if we go to this tab for passwords, right, there's a couple of things here to turn on and off. So one is forgot username, if you want to have that on and off. And there's one more here, is password unlock enabled. The wording on this is really not very well aligned with the UI. So, but these are the two checkboxes that will turn those things on and off. And then you'll see that there's some options here in terms of how do we want to validate a person's identity when we're doing a pass. So some of these are fairly weak in terms of the current password, code to your email and phone. That's a little bit better. The TOTP is a little bit stronger, so you can use a mobile app which supports TOTP um, to be able to validate, the identity of the person. Right? And again, here's so one is for the change passwords, the other one's for the reset passwords, right? And in this case, they're different, but they could be aligned. Right? And then the one I was looking for, let's see. The question is no question and answer systems. The question and answer system is your challenge response. So if you have right here, the challenge response, that would be your question and answer system, right? And let's see, do I? No, it's on the password reset option, not on the change password. Okay. But yeah, it's there on the. We're just using different words for it. Okay, and let me just check one thing here. Okay, let's continue to. Well, actually, while we're here, let's. I want to just open up another tab here and just talk about. There's a number of different places where we can change passwords, right? So in the self-service portal, for example, the self-service, you have two options here. One is called change password, and then the other one is called, and you can pick again. So these are the options that we turned on. You can pick and choose how you want to validate who you are, and then basically continue in that direction, right? And then there is a option called change password extended. And this was a little bit different because you may have a large number of applications and you may not want to change the passwords in all of them, right? So this whole change password extended allows us to basically pick the systems that we want to reset our password in. There's also the option for, this is more of like a manager-driven self-service. Like, so under user access, you can see your direct reports, and let's say you have various options. And again, these buttons are part of like a menu bank. You can turn them on and off based on the role. And if you go here, the manager can basically, again, they can validate who they are and then go ahead and reset their the password for this person, right? So, and this is sometimes that we have environments where um, the company doesn't want people calling the help desk for every last thing. And if your manager can take care of a few things, then we can go from there. Okay, let's go back to the next set of things that we. Okay, so the next couple of topics are going to we're going to talk about branding and we're going to talk about the APIs. And there's a topic which I've been kind of avoiding in a way, and that's this. It's the topic about explaining what there's a menu option in OpenIAM. It's called a content provider. And when we installed OpenIAM in the first session, the last thing that we did was to define a default content provider. And then after that, we were able to log in. So, and I purposely didn't go into great detail of what a content provider is and why it has any value, simply because it wasn't really relevant at that point, and that was kind of causing confusion. But we're kind of at a point now where there is some value to kind of talking about it now. So, and the most simple way that I can explain it is like a content provider is kind of OpenIAM's name for it's an alias to a domain, right? Some other products call it a realm, but largely it's like you can pick the whatever domain you have, and you're basically giving it a alias, and linked to that alias are a number of things which are important. One is the authentication provider. We'll talk about that, probably next time, where um, the authentication provider is kind of giving us some backend capabilities of how we want to take care of the authentication, meaning like maybe we want to do LDAP based authentication, right? So it gives us a way to kind of configure that kind of a flow. We can have authentication policies linked to it. We can have branding. If we look at the example that I talked about earlier about that organization level delegation, so like let's say that we have a system that is catering to both internal people and maybe some external folks. Maybe they're your partners, right? And you have two different entry points. Maybe one is called myIDM, whatever your domain is for your employees, and then maybe your external domain is partners dot whatever your domain is.com. And for each one, you may have different branding because you're targeting a different set of people. You may have different authentication policies around that, specific group of people. You may allow federation from different places into these. So by having these different content providers, we can, um, just create aliases which would allow us to target these use cases a little bit better with a little bit more flexibility, right? Um, even things like, say, for example, like, say, internal people may authenticate against their Active Directory, whereas external people may authenticate using the OpenIAM database, or they may use, say, maybe even a social login, right? Depending on what the use case is. So it gives us that flexibility. Um, and one of the things that when you open it up, and I'll show you this in a couple of minutes, is that there's a whole bunch of URLs that you can define with it. And those URLs are URLs that make up OpenIAM, and they might be URLs for applications that you want to protect. Like maybe you want to do SSO to legacy applications, right? And you want to have these things here. There is a button on that screen that says create URL, and it would generate all those default URLs for OpenIAM. By all means, use that button and do not try to create it yourself. It is one, it's a waste of time because there's a way to do it, and then two, it's just incredibly error prone, and you'll get annoyed and frustrated with it for no reason. Okay. So we're gonna then, since we talked about the content providers, we're gonna talk a little bit about branding now. So branding is pretty simple. We only really have two options here. One is we can upload the logo that you want to replace, and we can implement our own custom CSS file, and that will allow you to change, what the look and feel of the application is. So if we're going to change the CSS file, we can host it in two different places. One is it can be hosted locally, or the second, it can be hosted on an external server. If it's an external server, then it's straightforward. You just define what the URL is of that CSS file, and it goes. Now, just keep in mind that it should be in a place that will load fairly quickly, and you're not going to introduce network latency and things like that. That will, basically create, adverse effects, right? But if you're going to put it in locally, then in the file system, which is under user local OpenIAM, you need to add another directory called static data, and then create a custom CSS file and just basically place it there. I haven't tried to create a custom CSS file here because this is the one area where I think on our documentation we actually have a pretty couple of good examples that you can use about what that file could look like for both branding the login page, the self-service, when you log into it, the forgot password pages. So there's examples there, and I think you'll be able to take those and modify them pretty easily, right? But if you run into a problem, just let us know, and we can obviously help out with it. Okay. The next topic really is about self-registration, and so self-registration, again, it's one of those options that you can turn on for your IDP. For a lot of customers, this is not going to be something that you're going to want to use. Your onboarding, and offboarding methods are going to be linked to your HR system, and this is not a valid use case. But there are customers where this is a valid use case, right? They have, like for example, like in education, you may have temporary people, visiting. You may have alumni that want to register. In other corporations, you may have like a kiosk where you want someone to kind of sign up and get an account for a day or something like that, right? So there are cases where you would be, where you would need this. And so what we did here was we basically took the concept that we had around the page templates, where you could build a template, define the fields, and make it a little bit more flexible. And so the idea is that you can have multiple pages that make up your flow. And I'll show you what those templates look like in a second. And then for each page in your flow, you can just add whatever fields you want, the same way that we did for for the page templates, right? That same mechanism. You can create your own custom fields and kind of build this out. Now, when you have a self-registration page and you submit a request, there's a couple of different options that you have. You can, on one side, do like a traditional, like send out an email notification, have them confirm their email, and you can activate their account that way. For, like a B2C type of use case, or maybe even B2B, that might be fine. If we're looking at like onboarding, vendors or things like that in a more corporate setting, that may not be the way that you want to go about doing it. So for that, you have the option to turn on the underlying workflows and have a workflow that will go through the approval process, and after approval, it will create the accounts for you, right? In 422, there is one more option, which is that this integrated, you can turn on the identity verification system. We're using a service called Encode, but there's hooks in there where you can create new additional integrations besides Encode. But the idea is that a person can upload, their documents, like their driver's license and passports, or even take a selfie, and then have that information go and up against whatever systems that Encode is using to verify this identity. And if that checks out, you get a token back. But this could be another way to validate, people who, that it is their identity that, that we've confirmed. And as we go forward, this will be, integrated into the help desk verification as well, um, and even also the forgot password, so that we can just go deeper in terms of the level of checks we can have in place. Okay, let's go play with the self registration, for a minute or two, and then we'll go to the OpenIAM API. Okay, so under the admin menu option, there is, well, going back, first of all, when we were talking about branding, there's an option for UI themes, right? And you can see the various themes. So in this case, let's say this is the demo instance that I have, and it's, this one has got a local file. We uploaded some images. This theme is also linked to that content provider. So if I come here and I go to content providers, you'll see on this page somewhere, it's got a UI theme that's linked to it, and so you can see, which part's there, right? And then this did not load properly. You see what's going on. I wanted to show you one. Okay, so underneath this, so on this content provider, there's a couple of things here that, some of these things about authorizations, and, we want to show this up on the application page. One that comes in handy sometimes is this application unavailable. So this checkbox, if the system is down for maintenance or something like that, you can turn this on, um, and basically the proxy will redirect to another page. Unfortunately, too, this has been made a lot more flexible, where you can define the message that you want to show and things like that. It's been built out a lot more. So if an application is down, or the system is slow, you can kind of put up messages there and you can show them. But again, it'll be linked to the content provider, that you can kind of have this level of control there, right? And then if you look down below, you can see the authentication rules which are being defined. And here are the various, URI patterns, right? So if you created a new content provider, you would use the add default patterns, and it will generate all the default patterns that you want. Okay. Um, Moving on to the self-registration. So under administration, there is a menu option called self-registration configuration, right? And then we have, um, a flow that we created earlier. We can kind of get a view that this is a two-part. So it's basically, the first step, you're going to get a page, right? And then depending on success or failure, it's going to take you to the second page, and there'll be a different page depending on what's shown there, right? So it's a little bit more flexible. And again, this will be getting built out a lot more, as we go on through this year. So the first step, right, we have the fields that we've picked. And here, if I want to, I can go ahead and, I can add other fields to it. So it's not drag and drop like it is in the other side, but you don't need to keep going back and forth between the page templates in this. And so here you can say, well, what are the conditions, and I can define, some rules. So this is kind of similar to the the criteria that we have on the business rules, where you can define some checks, and based on how these checks work out, you can just, decide, you know, which page you're going to transition to. Okay, last thing that we want to cover today is talk about the APIs. Okay, so when we want to use the OpenIAM API, so first of all, the overall the OpenIAM UI is largely a client to the underlying API layer. So there's a rather extensive REST API layer that you can use, for your own applications or your own clients that you create. So the first thing that you need to do before you can use that is you need to create sorry, it's called it's yeah, sorry, it's called an authentication provider, and in that authentication provider you need to define the OAuth client, the that you're going to be using it, you're creating an OAuth client, that the authorization grant flow that you want to select. You need to define the scopes. You need to define like the JWT issuer. And then when you save that, it's going to generate the client ID and secret, right? Those scopes, they're basically limiting which endpoints you can call if you're really referring to the REST API, right? So in this example, I have basically web consoles, slash REST slash API, star, right? So basically all the APIs that relate to the web console and self-service are exposed. You don't have to do it that way. You can limit it to, you know, um, you know, you can limit it to a certain API endpoint and use that by itself, right? And all the APIs, correction, most of the APIs have been documented and are exposed through Swagger. There's a few which have not been, and we're working on correcting that, right? But once you have this OAuth client created, then you can build your own client to be able to make the API call. So for this exercise, I'm using Postman because it was a little bit easier to represent visually than to try to write a bunch of code and show how the code works, right? All right, let's jump over to that part. Um, and okay, so authentication provider. If we go to access control and we go to authentication provider, and if we were to create a new authentication provider, it will ask you what kind of client you want to create. A bunch of these are social login things. The one you care about here is the OAuth client. And then you'll go ahead and you'll fill this out, right? So you'll put in your details. I'm not going to do this because the chances of me fumbling through it and making a mess and confusing you more are extremely high. So this was one which I created earlier. So basically the only thing I filled out was the name of the provider, the GWT issuer, the signing algorithm, which basically you can pick from here, the scopes that I want to use, right? I hit save, and then it basically generated this client ID and secret, right? Uh, these two callbacks, I think I got them from Postman, from their documentation to be able to make this work, right? So once I have this, then the next part is to go to Postman. All right, so this might be a little bit hard to read. I apologize for that. So I created a Postman client earlier, which basically it's an OAuth 2 client that I picked. It has some details about the demo, the URL of the instance that I'm using, my my OAuth 2 URLs, and then I've got a placeholder for a client ID and secret. And once all these things are set up, I'm going to say go ahead and get me a new access token. Um, and in this case, you know what? One second, I'm going to back out of this for a second. This is it's using a token that I created earlier, and I'd rather just start from scratch. Let's see if I can just log out. All right, we'll try this again. So first thing is, right, you're going to authenticate. All right, never mind, it's just bypassing it. Okay, so I have a token that I got, and then I'm going to use that token. And then once I have that, then I have these various API calls that I've defined, right? So in this case, I'm going to look up a user with the principal name of sysadmin. And I'm going to get rid of a couple of other parameters in the search. And if I do a send, it's going to go ahead and pull back that information, right? And then similarly, if I go to see the create user, I've put in some default information, test. I should give it today's date, right? And we'll call this, and then we'll change the employee ID. And when I send this over, so I'm sending in a role ID and a group IDs, and but really this job title is going to trigger one of those business rules that we created last time. So not only should it provision the account into OpenIAM using the API, but it should also, and so it said this was saved, it generated a user ID for me, and if we go back to our client and do a search, okay, so this is the user that we just created. It's not active, but you see all the other entitlements that it got. These were from the business rules. And, the entitlements show, what was done. And if I look at the user history, it will tell me everything that, it just did, right? And obviously the log viewer, this is a different view of it, would kind of show that as well. Okay. I said all the documentation, this is Swagger. So if you come here into administration, there's a menu option called documentation links. And not the easiest thing to read, but here, if you go to, say, Web Console, for example, you'll open it up and you should be able to see, for example, the user-related operations. And so, for example, the search operations that we were using, you can see them, over here, and you can define, hopefully users to kind of get started. Right? That being said, that's what we had planned for our session today. Happy to answer any questions that may still be there. If not, I will see you on Monday.